But as freaked out about as they are about the fact that there would be harsh rhetoric by people on January the 6th, and that you would have people who would enter the sacred temple of democracy. How dare them enter the temple of democracy and shout things. And then some of them got violent. Well, let's go back and take a look at Whitmer's own experience doing this. She was the ringleader of, I don't know, was it an insurrection in Michigan? You take a look at this.
So when the governor locked the public out during their attack on collective bargaining, I threw open the doors of the Capitol and I led the resistance from my office.
Oh, she threw open the doors and led the resistance.
Chanting,
2012.
Let us in. Let us in.
That's Whitmer. We're going to fight, are you? Her followers use violence and intimidation. See? Look at this.
The police are the army of the rich! The police are the army of the rich! Police are the army of the rich! Police are the army of the rich!
Looks pretty scary to me. Wow. If looks could kill, I guess just like January the 6th, everybody would be dead. We'd be celebrating the funeral of AOC as well. Wow, look at that. They're all over the Capitol, those of you who are listening. They're completely filling the floor and the second level.
Jesse Jackson, because
So is that democracy in action or is that an insurrection? That depends on which political party you're in, of course.
Some of the pro-union crowds raided a tent full of right-to-work supporters, and apparently one person was injured as they did so.
Some of those protesters tried to get into the Senate. That caused state police to shut the building down.
we're going to continue to fight. This fight is not over.
Yeah, okay, well, that's Gretchen Whitmer. And she's a hero of the people, right? She's not an enemy of the state, except she threw the doors open. She invited the people in. They got violent. They're very angry. And so then let's take a look at January the 6th, one more thing before we get to Stewart Rhodes. This is a mother who was sentenced, given one of the most stringent sentences, 3 months, but also 3 years probation after those 3 months. 3 months in federal prison simply because she brought a 14-year-old son to the January the 6th protests last year. This was a sentencing that happened a week ago, last Friday. A judge sentenced a woman to 3 months in federal prison after she pled guilty to the non-violent misdemeanor of illegally parading in the building. The sentence is one of the longer prison terms that's been handed out since the prosecution began. And let me just say again, Sam from InfoWars, who was shooting as a cameraman, people have used pictures of Sam calmly walking through the velvet ropes, taking pictures of a news event. That's what news people do. News people don't do what Alex Jones and the rest of them did, which is to run away to the other side of Washington so that, I don't get accused of anything. No, a news person does what Sam did. That's why Alex basically is ignoring him. And he did nothing other than go in and peacefully and calmly videotape what was going on. And then you had the case that looked very much like what they're trying to make this out to be, except this is very different. This is actually really was a violent attack on Congress. This was in 1954. Seditious conspiracy charges were successfully brought in 1954 to the now largely forgotten storming of the Capitol building. 4 pro-independence Puerto Rican activists rushed the building and they opened fire on the House floor, wounding several congressional representatives. You understand? These guys rushed in, armed, and shot congressmen. They and more than a dozen others who assisted in the attack were convicted of seditious conspiracy. Oscar Lopez Rivera, former leader of the Puerto Rican independence group that orchestrated a bombing campaign that left dozens of people dead or maimed in the 1970s and 80s, spent 35 years in prison for seditious conspiracy before he had his sentence commuted in 2007 by President Obama. So the one time that you've had in recent history, we could say 1954, where you had a actual violent attack, people were doing bombing campaigns, they actually invaded the Capitol with guns, they shot congressmen, and the guy gets sentenced to prison, and it was Obama who let him go. Oh, isn't that interesting? And then you have the Huttery militia. And that was in Michigan about the same time as that clip that I showed you of Whitmer and her insurrection, where Whitmer is throwing open the doors of the Capitol building, according to her, letting in a violent mob. And it was violent. And they were screaming and shouting, and they were anti-government, actually. She was very proud of that. And so at that time, you had the FBI try to set up the Huttery militia. And a judge ordered acquittal on the seditious conspiracy charges, same thing they've charged Stewart Rhodes with in that 2012 trial. As a matter of fact, before it even went to the jury, the judge in that case, Victoria Roberts, said, this is so egregious, this indictment, we're not even going to try this. She just tossed the entire case. There was never an attack, unlike Whitmer, right? Highly offensive remarks were made about the police and the government. They were wrongly turned into a high-profile criminal case that drew public praise from then U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder, who in 2010 called the Huttery militia a dangerous organization. And yet it was simply the FBI infiltrating these people. You had you had an FBI informant who was paid $31,000. You had another FBI agent who embedded into this group for a very, very long time. For such a long time that he posed as a trucker from New Jersey so he could record what one of these guys was saying, criticizing government as he was probably provoking him to do it. He got so embedded with this guy, the guy that he was spying on, the guy that he was setting up, that the guy made him his best man in his wedding. Isn't that amazing? See, this is what the FBI does to protect us, of course. They create, and then they're like a bunch of firemen who go around starting fires and then rushing in and putting them out so they can show that they're heroes. They're a bunch of arsonists trying to burn our country down. Well, nobody had any weapons, and it was not an insurrection, and nobody's been charged with an insurrection. But the guy says, well, now we've got somebody that we've charged with sedition, so well, it's not the same thing. As CNN, though, says, the seditious conspiracy charge carries the same possible consequences as an obstruction charge, but it's rarely used. It's politically loaded, and it's been difficult for the Justice Department to use successfully against defendants in the past. Attorney General Merrick Garland has balked at earlier efforts to bring the seditious conspiracy charge, but in the months since, people briefed on the matter say that the FBI investigators and D.C. federal prosecutors have spent much time building the case. In other words, pressuring him, because the FBI is a completely politicized bureaucracy. They're not investigators, they're instigators. And so you have Merrick Garland, who realizes that he's going to, I think, lose this case unless they can really rig it. And again, that's what Glenn Greenwald said. He said, normally something like this doesn't go through. But in this environment, it is so corrupt right now in Washington, D.C., this could possibly go through. Now, to the case of Stewart Rhodes. What is interesting is that they did get signal communication. Signal is supposed to be secure. I've talked to William Binney in the past, and he said there isn't, and he was a global technical head for the NSA. He became a whistleblower about the fact that they were spying on everybody in America. But when I asked him, I said, what's the best thing that people can do to keep their conversations private? He said, there isn't anything you can do. If you are an individual of interest, they will eventually get in no matter what you use. They'll brute force their way in one way or the other. And that's what we're now seeing with these signal charges. So that's interesting. My problem that I have with Stewart Rhodes are the many public and private allegations of improper financial dealings made by a lot of people. Some of them have talked to me directly. And as long as that has not been resolved, I don't want to give his organization any assistance in terms of, if that's being run improperly. I don't want to be a part of that. It's just that simple. But I think that this is a nonsense charge. Rhodes has denied directing the riot inside the Capitol. He told the New York Times over the summer that some of the members went off mission, quote unquote, but he gave no instructions to enter the Capitol. He said there were zero instructions from me or from leadership to do so. Now, the signal messages that they say that they have been able to intercept. Rhodes allegedly said in a November the 5th, 2020 signal message, he said, there is no standard political or legal way out of this. And so he went on to say, and they have the time and date on these signal messages. This is released, I guess, as part of the indictment. All I see Trump doing is complaining. I see no intent by him to do anything. So the patriots are taking it into their own hands. They've had enough. Now, what does that mean? Taking it into their own hands. I mean, I said the same thing on air. I said, Trump is not doing anything. He has no intent to do anything. I said the same thing that the Trump-appointed judge said when he came before him. He said, you knew these were going to be the new rules and you didn't do anything to stop them before the election. Why are you complaining about it now? And I said, we could have had an economy that wasn't locked down. You could have taken your foot off of the throat of all the middle-class businesses that you're putting out of business, President Trump. You could have removed all the helicopter cash that you were giving these tyrants, most of them Democrats, but not all of them Democrats. You were financing the persecution and the eradication of the middle class, just like you were financing these bioweapons. And at any point, you could have pulled that money back and stopped it. You were the instigator of this stuff, and I wouldn't lift a finger to support you. And I refused to vote for him. And he didn't want to do anything to reverse this. Nothing was being done. Stewart Rhodes was exactly right about that aspect. Now, what was he supposedly doing? They don't have anything here that I see, not in this article, that is all that damning. But here's the other thing. What was the objective? When Stewart Rhodes and these other people, and Alex and Roger Stone, all these people, they all knew that he wasn't doing anything. Anybody who's watching this full time understands that. And so what was that all about? Trump, who didn't do anything to stop the destruction of our country. Trump, who didn't do anything to prevent a dishonest election. Trump, who didn't do anything to contest that election of any consequence. And I laid out the cases for that. And I've talked about that on this program, about how it was too late and too little that was being done, that they needed to make their case to the state legislatures where they had razor-thin issues. And if they could make a case that these razor-thin victories of Biden in these Republican-led states, they could have had another slate of electors sent, but they didn't even bother to do that. But, when Stewart Rhodes says, I don't see Trump doing anything other than complaining, so then why would you show up on January the 6th and try to keep him in office? He hadn't done anything except complain and divide for 4 years. And, of course, raise money. So why would you keep that guy in office? So he could continue to do nothing? I don't understand it. Rhodes allegedly said patriots entering their own capital to send a message to the traitors is nothing compared to what is coming. He says another member, not Rhodes, allegedly said, after this, if nothing happens, it's war, Civil War 2.0. Well, I don't know that you can build a case out of that. As a matter of fact, if we go back and we look at history, there's been a lot of times when they have tried to build sedition and treason cases. AP even went back and put this in. And understand, these are three different things. Sedition is essentially political speech designed to overthrow a government. You see why it is such a conflict with the First Amendment. It's a big conflict with the First Amendment. It's why you typically don't get people charged with it, and you typically don't get any convictions with it because we have a First Amendment that allows us to talk about politics. So it would be a very, very narrowly prescribed thing if it even were allowed to exist. It would be narrowly prescribed by the First Amendment. So that's sedition. It's about political speech to overthrow a government. Insurrection is actually acts of violence. And then treason is specifically defined in the Constitution. And that is only if you are levying war against the United States or helping the U.S.'s enemies. That is treason. And so let's take a look at some of these. Aaron Burr, who is the ancestor of Congressman Burr out of North Carolina, former Vice President Aaron Burr, he was tried in 1807 for treason because he allegedly plotted to urge some states to leave the Union as part of a military adventures to seize land from Spain and Mexico. His trial was an early test of treason as defined in the Constitution, which says that treason is only when you are levying war against the United States or giving enemies aid and comfort. Jurors acquitted Burr after instructions that prosecutors had to show not just that Burr had made plans to go to war, but had actually gone to war against the United States. Do you see anything here? Even if they can go through and intercept signal communications by Rhodes saying, oh, yeah, we need to plan to go to war. If you go back to the case of Aaron Burr, they said, no, you have to actually go to war. You have to actually do it. The next, of course, you had Benedict Arnold, who was never captured or tried for treason. You had escaped slaves in 1851. In Christiana, Pennsylvania, and several white people who aided them were charged with treason because they resisted U.S. Marshals who were seeking to capture the escaped slaves and take them back. The lawyers argued that their resistance was not akin to levying war. The charges were dropped. Oh, by the way, the Supreme Court said that they should be captured and brought back and put into slavery. That's one of the reasons why we don't do everything the Supreme Court says. The Dred Scott decision. Jefferson Davis was actually at war with the U.S. The president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, was charged with treason, but the prosecution was later abandoned. And guess what? No Confederate generals or statesmen faced the charge. Why? Because unlike the time we have right now, where Biden and Eric Swalwell and Beto O'Rourke were campaigning, it's like, yeah, we're ready to come after you with our military weapons and our nuclear bombs and our jets and all this other kind of stuff. We're going to take your guns and we're going to do whatever we have to do with force. They want a civil war. That's why you need to not be chumps and give it to them. Nullification. Local government is the way to do this, not to challenge them because they really do want a war. See, when Jefferson Davis and the Confederate generals who had fought a war against the United States, when they were, they didn't come after them for treason because they didn't want a civil war at that time. They'd had enough of it. But we have people in Washington now who are itching for it, and they're fixing to do it. Has your news been censored, banned over and over again? Has vital information been held prisoner by mainstream and anti-social media? It's the duty of every thinking person to make the great escape to thedavidknightshow.com. There you'll find links to live streams, videos, audio podcasts, and support links. Live stream the show at DLive and every Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. Eastern. Videos at BitChute and YouTube. New audio podcast, The Real David Knight Show, at Podbean, iTunes, Stitcher, iHeart, Spotify, and more. But even though there's a light at the end of the tunnel, without your support, the show will run out of gas. The links to support the show are at thedavidknightshow.com. To donate via Subscribestar, donate via or donate via Cash App, Bitcoin, or P.O. Box. Our sincere thanks to all of you who have stood with us to get this far. Please don't forget to share the links and pray for the country as well as our family.